Welcome back. I'm Stephen and this is episode 3 of the Ejaries podcast. In the last episode we walked through the registration process. This episode goes into the documents. The difference between a registration that takes 30 minutes and one that takes 30 days is almost always the documents. The process is fast when the paperwork is right. It's slow when it isn't. So this episode is the practical preparation guide. The core list for a standard residential tenancy. The document set is the following: the signed tenancy contract, both parties signed, dated, containing the property details, the term, the rent, and the payment schedule. The title deed of the property, held by the landlord, confirms. The landlord owns the property they are renting to you. Ejaries ID of the tenant, front and back. Valid, not expired. Ejaries ID or passport of the landlord, depending on whether the landlord is an individual or registers internationally. Commercial license of the landlord, if the landlord is a company. The most recent DEWA bill for the property, in some cases. A title deed alternative, called an affection plan, in the case of certain off-plan or under-construction properties. That's the standard set most residential tenancies need. Everything on that list. Some need more. Some need fewer items if specific conditions apply. Why each document matters. The tenancy contract is the underlying agreement. The Ejaries system records its terms. Without the contract, there is nothing to register. The title deed proves the landlord has the right to rent the property. The Ejaries system cross-checks the landlord on the contract against the registered owner on the title deed. If the names don't match, the registration is paused while the discrepancy is resolved. The tenant's Ejaries ID identifies the tenant in the system. It links the Ejaries record to the tenant's residency profile, which is what lets DEWA, immigration, and other government departments find your Ejaries when they need it. The landlord's identification serves the same purpose on the landlord's side. The system links the registration to a verified individual or company. The commercial license is required where the landlord is a company. The license confirms the company exists, is in good standing, and the signatory on the contract is authorized to lease property on its behalf. The DEWA bill, where required, confirms the property exists and is connected to utilities. It's a secondary verification step that some registrations require. The affection plan is the substitute for a title deed in off-plan or pre-handover situations where the title deed hasn't been issued yet. It's a document from the developer that confirms the unit's existence, location, and ownership status. The mismatch problem. The most common cause of delay in Ejaries registration is a mismatch between the tenancy contract and the underlying property record. The classic case is this: a tenant signs a contract with someone they understand to be the landlord. That person presents themselves as the owner, or as the owner's representative. The contract goes to Ejaries. The system pulls the title deed and finds the property is registered to a different name. What happened is usually one of three things. The contract was signed with a property manager who isn't the legal owner. The contract was signed with a previous owner, whose sale to a new owner hasn't been completed on the register. The contract was signed with an authorized representative under a power of attorney that needs to be referenced on the registration. Each of these is solvable. None of them is solvable on the spot. At the registration counter, the fix depends on the cause. A property manager needs to produce a power of attorney or a management agreement that authorizes them to lease the property. We touch on powers of attorney in detail on POA for property.A and on the broader instrument. On general POA.A, a new owner who hasn't completed the title transfer need to either complete the transfer first or produce the sale documentation that's pending registration. A representative acting under a power of attorney needs to ensure the POA names the property and authorizes lease execution in line with the DLD's wording requirements. In every case, the time lost is between days and weeks. The way to avoid it is to check the title deed against the contract signatory before signing. The Ejaries ID problem. The second most common cause of delay is the tenant's Ejaries ID being expired or in some kind of administrative limbo. The Ejaries system requires a valid Ejaries ID. If yours has expired and the renewal is in progress, the registration may not proceed until the new ID is issued. Same applies if you've recently moved between sponsors or between visa categories, and the system has a temporary gap in your record. The fix is to ensure the ID is current before starting the registration. If a renewal is in progress, you may need to wait for the new card. The exception is where the system allows the registration to proceed on the basis of a valid residency visa, even if the physical ID card is being reissued. That varies by case. The registration is fast when the paperwork is right. It's slow when it isn't. The single best preparation step is checking the title deed. against the contract signatory before you sign anything. The registration is fast when the paperwork is right. It's slow when it isn't. The single best preparation step is checking the title deed against the contract signatory before you sign anything. Documents the landlord controls. Some of the documents required for Ejaries are in the tenant's hands. Some are in the landlord's. The tenancy contract sits between them, signed by both. But the title deed, the affection plan, the landlord's. Commercial license, these are landlord-controlled. When a tenant is registering Ejaries themselves, which happens often, particularly when the landlord is non-resident or unresponsive, the tenant needs to obtain these documents from the landlord at the point of signing the contract. The most useful piece of practical advice in this whole episode is the following. When you sign the contract, ask for digital copies of the title deed and any other landlord-side document the registration will need. Get them before you hand over money. The landlord has every incentive to provide them at signing. They have less incentive to track them down when you call, asking for them 4 weeks later. Documents for non-standard situations. A few specific scenarios change the document list. If the property is under joint ownership, multiple owners on the title deed, the registration may require evidence of all owners' consent to the tenancy. In practice, the signature of one owner is often accepted, where they're representing the others, but the system can flag the discrepancy. If the tenancy includes parking, storage, or other associated spaces that are separately titled, additional documents may be required. If the tenant is paying rent under a long-term payment plan rather than the standard check structure, the contract should reflect this clearly and may need supporting documentation. If there's a guarantor on the contract, the guarantor's identification documents are required. If the contract is in a language other than Arabic or English, a certified translation is required. What to take from this episode? The standard document list is the contract, the title deed, both parties' identification, the landlord's commercial license, if the landlord is a company, and supporting documents where the property situation requires them. The most common cause of delay is mismatch between the contract signatory and the registered owner of the property. Check this before you sign. The most common preventable delay is an expired Emirates ID. Check this before you start. Collect digital copies of the landlord side documents at the time of signing the contract. You will need them. The right time to ask is when the landlord is incentivized to give them to you, which is at signing. In the next episode, we go to renewals. What changes year on year, what stays the same, and the rules around rent increases that come into play when the renewal date approaches. Thanks for listening. The full transcript is at transcriptor.a. For Ejaries registration support, ejaries.a is the operational service.